then I will announce David Stroud, who's that's able to join us today. David has had a long involvement with the Ramsar Convention, having been involved with the United Kingdom's implementation of the convention and related EU legislation since the mid-1980s. He currently chairs the convention's scientific and technical review panel, and has previously served the panel in other various capacities. His background is in waterbird conservation. He previously chaired the technical committee of the African-Eurasian Waterbird Agreement, and I can say firsthand, although he's not here to join us today, that both he and Roy were instrumental at the last COP in negotiating numerous tricky resolutions, and so there's great thanks on behalf of the United States for their diligence and work. So I guess with that, do we have the video to start? No, it's all right. It's a bit of a dance here. Thanks.
First, I want to say how very much I regret not being with you today. I'd particularly like to send my congratulations to all of you involved with this fantastic new Ramsar designation, working both locally and nationally. It really is quite a stunning achievement. And looking at the paperwork makes clear the enormous amount of footwork that's been undertaken to make this a reality. But let's turn to wider context. In late 2019, we know more about the state of the planet than we have ever done before. In May, the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, or IPBES, issued a global assessment on the state of biodiversity and ecosystem services. This followed hard on the heels of its comprehensive assessment on land degradation and restoration, whilst in August, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, issued a special report on climate change and sustainable land management, focusing on many of the causes and consequences of climate change, especially in relation to land and agriculture. Further IPCC assessments have followed, including one last week on the prospects for the frozen parts of our planet. These documents add to the existing pile of related agreements, notably Ramsar's own comprehensive global wetland outlook, published late last year, and the UN Convention to Combat Desertification's Global Land Outlook, published in 2017. The findings of all these assessments make grim reading, but in multiple ways they are interlinked, ultimately relating back to the profoundly unsustainable way that much of the developed world lives in the 21st century, and the long-term consequences of that unsustainability. In particular, this body of science stresses both that the state of nature on land and at sea is influenced, amongst other things, by the changing climate, whilst the atmosphere and climatic processes are in turn influenced by the progressively degrading state of nature, for example, through the loss of carbon arising from the degradation of soils and loss and drainage of wetlands. Recent IPCC and IPBES reports strongly identify these linkages. Neither the climate nor the biodiversity crises can be solved alone. Much thinking has already been done on the responses to the current emergency, and indeed much more has yet to occur. But a repeatedly stressed high priority is the need to establish networks of protected areas, the jewels in the crown. Protected areas are one of the oldest means through which humans have provided protection for biodiversity, and there's at least a 900-year history of protecting land for nature in Europe. In recent decades, a large number of scientific publications have demonstrated their effectiveness. Indeed, IPBES concluded that conservation actions, including protected areas, have been successful in preventing the extinction of some species. But IPBES considered there's more to do. Expanding and effectively managing the current network of protected areas, including terrestrial, freshwater, and marine areas, is important for safeguarding biodiversity, particularly in the context of climate change. Conservation outcomes also depend on adaptive governance, strong societal engagement, effective and equitable benefit sharing mechanisms, sustained funding, and monitoring and enforcement of rules. Now let's turn directly to the Ramsar Convention. Those who drafted the convention in back in 2017, had a clear vision of the importance of wetlands and their wider significance. Through their accession to the Convention, the parties recognise the interdependence of man and the environment, consider the fundamental ecological functions of wetlands as regulators of water regimes and as habitats, are convinced that wetlands constitute a resource of great economic, cultural, scientific and recreational value, the loss of which would be irreparable, express their desire to stem the progressive encroachment on and loss of wetlands, both now and in the future, and are confident that wetlands can be assured by combining far-sighted national policies with coordinated international action. It's well known that Ramsar was the first of the modern international environmental treaties. The fact that this first international environmental legislation addressed water and wetlands is perhaps unsurprising. Water, as well as being essential for life, also intimately connects the world's ecosystems. Further, through the water cycle, it is also a critical element of atmospheric processes. Water provides the means by which so many other habitats and their biodiversity are fundamentally linked together at multiple scales. Water systems, with their integrally connected wetlands, are the world's circulation system, physically linking the mountains to the sea. Metaphorically, the Niagara River can be considered perhaps as an enormous vein, draining water from the wetlands and headwaters of the Great Lake Basin out to the sea and bringing life to further wetlands all along the way. So what is the relevance of all this to this wonderful new Ramsar designation? The designation of a Ramsar site is the first step on the road to its sustainable management. And in making such a designation, Ramsar's contracting parties take on themselves an obligation to maintain the ecological character of the site. This is undertaken through management planning, bringing together all those whose actions influence the site to collectively ensure the values and character of the site is maintained for the future. Such processes have benefits well beyond the site itself, with well-managed Ramsar sites being local and indeed national exemplars of good practice, providing inspirational models for others. Another of the particular values of wetland sites, beyond their intrinsic individual importance of course, is their broader educational role. As I'm sure will be even further developed at Niagara River, the practical demonstration of local approaches to sustainable land and water management can have enormous wider educational benefits. With 125 million people living within an 8-hour drive of the Niagara River, the potential for environmental education outreach is really enormous, and I'm sure it will be grasped by all involved. Let's finally return to the IPBES Global Assessment on Biodiversity. With respect to future needs for protected areas, it concluded, safeguarding protected areas into the future also entails enhancing monitoring and enforcement systems, managing biodiversity-rich land and sea beyond protected areas, addressing property rights conflicts, and protecting environmental legal frameworks against the pressure of powerful interest groups. In many areas, conservation depends on building capacity and enhancing stakeholder collaboration, involving non-profit groups, as well as Indigenous people and local communities. As you go forward with this new Ramsar site, it's possible that many of those issues will need to be addressed. I'm sure you can do it, and I wish you well.